So Hans Wormhat, this video is entitled NPC for God.
Hans Wormhat. In this video I want to talk about a certain feeling that I get sometimes when I'm thinking back on a few different video games I played growing up. And since it's a feeling, I can just do my best to try to explain it.
Oops.
The God to these video games I played growing up. And since it's a feeling, I can just do my best to try to explain it. And so here we go. This game, Populous. In this game, you're playing this invisible hand, and you're kind of the god to these people. And you build a society, and you have your group of followers, and yeah, they worship you. And there's a few different games like this that I played. Black and White. Black and White is still the only game that's made me feel like a god. And so, of course, I feel some embarrassment, and my memories are tainted a little bit, but I guess sometimes there's some good in the bad, and one of the things is that thinking back on these video games, I just have a new perspective now about it. And so when you're playing these games, yeah, you are like the god character, but that's not exactly what this video is about. I'm more thinking about the NPCs in this game. These types of games. Especially games like this where you got to build a city. These were my favorite growing up. I loved these. And in a lot of these games, you have these little NPC characters that are running around, and the thing that gives me the feeling, it's just the suspension of
Hans is an NPC confirmed.
disbelief. I was always able in these games to just totally suspend my disbelief and immerse myself in these societies where people follow God, or often, of course, in these tainted examples, in these tainted games, it's usually pagan, multiple gods, lowercase g stuff. But that's not the point. The point is, I look back on these games and I look at the NPCs and just how they're fully committed into their religion. Their whole lives revolve around the religion.
Right, because that's the gameplay of the game. Because that's the game, is you being God. I haven't actually played these games, but it seems like it's like a sim where you're like controlling different aspects of their society or the world around them. And so, of course, the gameplay that they program into the NPCs is going to be centered around that conceit.
You hear them running around the streets talking about Apollo, and you know that they believe. You know how NPCs...
Okay, but they don't really believe. You get that, Hans, right? You know NPCs, like, don't actually have thoughts and feelings, right? They're programmed to behave certain ways.
They're not acting. NPCs are perfect in what they're doing. They're just fully committed to the role. An NPC doesn't doubt themselves.
The NPC doesn't think. Of course they don't doubt themselves. They don't have thoughts. It's literally just a computer program, Hans. NPCs do not have real thoughts.
They're playing their role, and they're fully committed to it, and they go through all the motions without questioning it. There's no ego there.
There's no anything there, Hans! How do you think video games work? Do you think that, like, when you play a video game and there's NPCs, they're like having thoughts and feelings, but they're like, no, I'm an NPC in a video game, I have to fulfill my role or whatever. No, there's no internal thought. There's no thought. They don't think. They're not alive. They're facsimiles of beings. They are not real. Reboot is canon confirmed.
And especially Black and White, this game, you have all the people praying to you, and you're this invisible hand god, and you can like grab rocks and chuck it at the people. So you grab rocks and chuck it at the people, and everybody's screaming and praying that God spares them their life, and just that total immersion that the NPC characters had into worshiping God.
Because they're programmed to say those lines, to act out those things, because the creator of the game said, well, we're having a game where the player is God, so of course we're going to have this be religious-centric, at least in some way. So when you do bad things to the NPCs, they're going to act as though they are praying and begging and stuff like that. They're not actually doing that, though, Hans, because they're not real. schlock with 10 bits. People like Hans are gonna have a real bad time when someone invents a holodeck.
It gives me a feeling of I want to be that. And I know it seems strange. I want to be that NPC worshiping God, who's worshiping them perfectly, and there's no phoniness there. That's what I'm trying to get at, is in these games, you're able to submerge yourself, you can suspend your disbelief and go back to a time where people did have...
How many subs does he have? 3.65. And I am up to 2.2. So we're getting there. Subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't already. I'm trying to get more subs than Hans Wormhat. That's my next goal.
Have such strong faith that you just don't see today. I always talk about plastic Christians because it feels like Christianity today is so plastic. And I think that's what the root of this feeling that I get is about the NPCs and these types of games that I love to play, is that they had such strong faith. And that...
No, they don't. They're just programmed that... How depressing is it to believe that, like, your ideal state would be being a robot for some religious figure? That's so sad.
Their lives revolved around their faith. What's the deal with neckbeards and Vikings? Just neckbeards.
What?
Weird things. And you see that people need this in their life, and it gets misplaced. People put their faith in the strangest things these days, and instead of putting their perfect faith in God, you get neckbeards that they want to suspend their disbelief and pretend to be an Odinist. And they just do it. They just go through the motions. I don't know how related this is, but it makes me think of it, how everybody agrees to just play along with this whole Santa thing for children. It makes me sick that people are willing to play along.
Why? It's like a fun thing for kids. It's like, ooh, there's like a magic guy who comes and he brings presents to you. Like, it's just a thing, Hans.
Play along to pretend to be an Odinist. People are willing to play along to pretend to do these weird Santa things that I don't even want to get into. But people aren't willing to just play along and put in the part to worship God.
Okay, first of all, most people in the United States are Christian. So yes, a lot of people do believe in God and worship God, as far as they understand it to be so. But yeah, there are also people who don't believe that, like myself, people who are non-believers, and that's also fine. What?
I think God needs to be worshipped. Just the humility, and going back to why these video games trigger that emotion in me, I think, is that the way that the NPCs in these video games worship God. Like, going back to, I talked about throwing a rock. Just when you read in the Bible of people shouting up to the sky, I just know in these games, people are just shouting up into the sky, praying for mercy and things like that. You just don't see people acting like that these days.
Right, because people, even though people are religious, in other ways people are also rational beings. So they understand if a tornado hits their house or a wildfire destroys their house, it's because of natural law, not because some deity got mad at them, at least most of the time. There are always going to be those, like, fire and brimstone people who are like, oh, this natural disaster happened because gay people exist or something. But, like, most people recognize that, like, something bad happened to you because of a natural thing that happened. It's not the anger of some deity.
And so hopefully I'm describing this feeling in a way that you can understand. It's just now we got plastic Christianity, we got coffee shop Christianity, where these beautiful cathedrals are not places where people are shouting out to God and laying down on the ground and crying, and just, it's not really a place of worship anymore. It's totally plastic. What is this? This isn't how people are supposed to worship God.
There's nothing
just to try to bring it back to the feeling that I get when I think of those video games and the way that the NPCs act is just how strong in their faith they were and how committed. And
okay, but they're not, Hans. They don't exist. Ugh, Daddy Sume with 10 bits. Taking on his argument, those NPCs are perfect worshippers because they had actual proof supernatural things are happening to them, and an invisible force is literally throwing rocks at you. I would bow and worship too if rocks were flying in the air on their own. Oh, God.
and how their whole society
I wouldn't. That'd be annoying. Like, why would you try and, like, I don't know. The entire concept of God in the way that it's depicted both in the Bible and in popular Christianity, even if I believed that God existed, I wouldn't worship God. Because the characterization of God in the Bible is profoundly evil, egocentric, and ridiculous. So I don't get that. Like, the entire idea that even if a God existed, that they would be worthy of worship is bizarre.
revolved around the religion, and it wasn't plastic or phony. So, Proverbs chapter 1, verse 7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. I think fear of the Lord comes into this. In the video games, the NPCs are afraid because you can use...
No, they're programmed to move and emote in such a way that makes them look afraid. They're not real, Hans.
Your magic hand to strike a lightning bolt right next to them and chuck a rock at them or things like that. Nowadays, people are so... I guess it's just life is so easy for people. People have no fear of God. They're afraid of fake stuff that they see on the TV. There's barely any fear of God. And again, tied in with this is just doing it. Displays of your religion. Thinking back to the old video games, they live in society where doing grand gestures for God is just an everyday part of life. Always talking about God.
Right, because that's what the game's about.
I know it's silly, but something I think about from Seinfeld all the time is George Costanza says once that nobody talks about God anymore. And it's true. People just don't talk about God anymore.
Right, because religion isn't a part of most people's everyday lives at this point. Which I think is for the better.
People don't live their lives for God like it's the most important thing. And
it's not.
Yeah, there is this just do it. People take this just do it and they turn it into being completely about vanity. But there is a just do it part to faith. And people always love to talk about fake it till you make it, but they mean that's another vanity thing. People don't apply that to faith, even though I think it can be helpful in faith. Sometimes you just got to do it, even though you don't feel like it. And I can just say for me personally that I think that this applies to faith too. Sometimes, even though if you don't feel like you have it, you can just fake it for a little bit and then you won't be faking it anymore. You know those people that they live such fake lives that it becomes real at a certain point. I believe that you can do that with a certain extent when it comes to faith. Just make sure that you're not just copying, don't just parrot what you see phony pastors at church do or what people do on the TV. If you're going to do this just do it thing, keep it strictly between you and God and try to get anything that you're going to do out of the Bible. Try to do things that are biblical. Just to give an example, you might try doing some oil anointing on yourself. I don't know exactly the details of how it works, but I just want to give one example of how we can try to live more religious-based lives. And I'm not saying that everybody needs to go anoint themselves with oil, and that's a really important part of being saved or anything like that. It's just living lives that are more mindful and going back to the type of living that people did when religion was the most important thing in people's lives. Hopefully I described that well. John chapter 14, verse 11. Believe me that I am in the Father, and the Father in me, or else believe me for the very work's sake. I think that this statement right here is getting at this just do it mentality when it comes to your faith. Sometimes you just got to go for it. And yeah, that's it. God bless everyone.
Yikes. Hans. Oh boy. Hans has deep, deep issues. But I guess we'll have to explore them further another day.